Hello, BookTube. I started a book club on this channel in February, the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club, and I made an unconventional choice for our first book in a couple of ways. All the read-alongs that I've done on this channel in the past have been books in the common domain, books where you could, if you wanted, easily get a copy from the library or download a free copy from Project Gutenberg. That's nice and curated, doesn't have anybody's thumbprint on it or anything like that. And for my book club, I decided to diverge from that into books that are under copyright. So you would have to buy a copy, new or secondhand, or you would have to get online at the library and wait for your copy to come in, or something like that. Go onto one of the horrible cesspits of secondhand retailing online or something like that, or even contact me for a copy. I worried about that choice, but my worry was groundless. A lot of you loved the idea of that, far more people than I expected. So I didn't have to worry about that. And the other unconventional choice was the fact that it was a long work of history that I chose. I know from personal experience dealing with readers for a very, very long time that some readers, quite a few in fact, are under the totally mistaken impression that there are gated communities in the book world, that there are books that you are just not prepared to read. I've often said there may be historical monographs, works of history by historians largely for fans and readers of history that are still very good, but that are kind of gated communities. But for the most part, especially when we're dealing in the popular marketplace, a work of history or biography or science or nature or anything that doesn't welcome you has failed. Most writers of popular works in any genre will know what side of the bread is buttered on, and they will make sure to tell a good story. They will make sure to involve you rather than exclude you and say, here are the 10 books you have to read before you can understand my book. I wanted to stress to people that there are a lot of books out there that are really good that don't say that. And I've been very gratified in the course of February to get emails from lots and lots of you saying that you kind of did consider A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman to be one of those books. I got a lot of emails at the beginning of the month from a lot of you saying, well, I'm happy to join in with the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club, but what do I have to read first in order to understand this book? And I responded to each one of you who wrote that and said, you don't need to read anything. Barbara Tuchman is a professional. She knows what she's doing. She will take care of your needs in this book. You can read further on any subject that's connected here once you're interested. That's the glory of reading history and biography, but you don't need it at all. And like I said, the response was much greater than I thought. I really have enjoyed this. I haven't quite figured out what I'm doing. I don't really know what separates a book club from a read-along, for instance. Maybe nothing does. Maybe something would be needed on a more typical BookTube channel. We're fairly close anyway. So I don't know that seeking the greater intimacy that seems implied in a book club, I don't know that was ever a sensible thing to do. I'm pretty accessible to you anyway. I will fiddle around with things to do. One of those things will definitely not be Discord. I don't know. I'm glad that it works for other people. I can tell already from having lurked in a lot of Discords in the last month that it definitely won't work for me. And I think probably along the same lines, a dedicated Voxer group wouldn't work for me either. Probably I will fiddle around around the edges of what we're already doing. But I realize that I have been way too late in announcing March's pick for the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club. So I wanted to do that today. And it's this, of course. It's Wolf Hall. It's Hilary Mantel's 2009 Booker Prize winning historical novel set in Tudor England, set in the reign of King Henry VIII. It's a big thing. It's absolutely ubiquitous. It was the talk of the literary season for 10 seasons in a row. You probably have a copy, or your used bookstore has many copies. That's existed in many, many different editions. Maybe you're familiar with it from one of the disastrous adaptations to stage or screen. And it is the story of Thomas Cromwell, who was a minister of King Henry VIII and who was executed. And on the surface, that thumbnail description of this book might give you the same impression that A Distant Mirror did, that I'm going to need to do a lot of preliminary reading before I get to this book. I'm not saying that I won't enjoy it, but I'm not ready for it with ready in heavy air quotes. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. You can dive into this book without knowing anything at all about Thomas Cromwell or about uh, the reign of King Henry VIII, and you will still be caught up. You will still be completely absorbed. Believe you me, you know as well as I do. Whether in the US or the UK, you know as well as I do the enormous size of this book's readership. Not all of those were Tudor experts. You don't need to worry about it. However, if you are worried about it, I thought I would give you a 10-second thumbnail to bring you up to speed. You do not need to read Wikipedia entries or anything like that. The 10-second thumbnail here is that in Tudor England, if you were a nobody and you wanted to become somebody, you wanted to rise at court, in circles of power, rather than in your own profession as a blacksmith or a baker or a drover or anything like that, if you wanted to rise in power as opposed to your profession, and you were nobody, meaning you didn't have a line, you didn't have a lineage, you didn't have a name, you were a commoner, the thing you had to do was attach yourself somehow to a household, which would not have been, that is not a mother, a father, and a couple of kids. That is a person who runs the establishment called a household. So you do have a family. You do have a husband and a wife and children and various other cousins and in-laws and connections. But you also have cooks and undercooks. You have men in livery, usually, who run errands for you, who can guard your door. You're more than just a family in a home. You are a household. If you're a nobody, and Thomas Cromwell was, he was a nobody, son of a slightly bigger provincial nobody, but not anybody at court, not anybody who would ever be inevitably destined for court, right? If you were the son or the nephew of a royal house or a house that did have an establishment, you had ins. You could work your way from a much higher level. Someone like Cromwell had to work from nothing. And by the time we see him at the beginning of this book, he has managed to do that. He has managed to become attached to a household and also a practicing lawyer in London. So far, far above where he started out. He had to go to war, he had to apprentice himself, he had to work at a whole bunch of different professions. Eventually, he attaches himself to the household of Cardinal Wolsey, who also rose from nothing, but we don't need to worry about that. By the time Wolsey's shadow is invoked in this book, he is the most powerful man in England aside from the king. And there are a lot of people who would have said, including the king. He was immensely wealthy, a prince of the church, and hoped to be pope. So his own household was immense. It was hugely wealthy, powerful, and influential. And Cromwell had attached himself to Wolsey's household, which means he'd attached himself to the court of King Henry VIII in a very minor way. He would have been one of a flock of underlings wearing Wolsey's livery, doing Wolsey's bidding, but largely anonymous in a room of his betters. That is the setting for the book as it starts. That is the Cromwell that we are meeting as this book starts. That is the Wolsey that we are meeting as this book starts. That is the setting that you need for this book. That's all. That our main character is Thomas Cromwell, and he came from nothing and is now something. So he is a man slightly on the rise. That's all you need to know. That is the starting point for this book. Everything else you need to know, Hilary Mantel will teach you. She won't seem like she's teaching you, but she will be teaching you a lot in this book. So this is what we're going to read for... This is what we're going to read for March, and let's take a look at it and see how we're going to split it up. Okay, so this is 650 pages, and it is in 6 parts. So surely we should do 2 parts a week, right? For March. So let's sketchily start with that for now, and if we have to amend it, we will as we get closer. So for March, let's read part 1 and part 2 for the first week of March of Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So part 1 and part 2 for the first weekend in March. We're still cooking along with A Distant Mirror, but I wanted to give you time. And again, feel free to contact me if you don't have any options for getting a copy of this book, and we'll see what we can do. There are millions of copies in print. There are millions of copies swimming around out there in the world. It shouldn't be too hard for you to get a copy for not much money, but I don't want to bankrupt you, so let me know if you do have trouble. But anyway, that's just a relatively quick announcement video for what we'll be doing in March. The Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club for March is Wolf Hall. So I hope to see you then. I will wrap this up, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.